The Supreme Court just dropped a 6-3 emergency ruling that changed federal law overnight, and most Americans still don't understand how fast this could affect them. This isn't some distant court fight in Washington. This could hit during a traffic stop, a gun purchase delay, or a self-defense investigation. People woke up thinking the rules were one way, and by morning, the legal ground had shifted. And the scary part is this: a lot of people online are already getting the ruling completely wrong. The case came through the Supreme Court's emergency docket, sometimes called the shadow docket. That means the court acted fast, without the long process most people expect. The 6-3 split showed exactly how divided the justices still are on gun rights and federal power. And today, we're breaking down what the court actually changed, what it didn't change, and why this matters right now. If you follow gun laws seriously and want real updates before the headlines catch up, subscribe now. Because these rulings are moving faster than most people realize, and confusion can get good people into real trouble. Here's what happened. The Supreme Court allowed a major federal gun restriction to stay in effect while lower court fights continue. That may sound technical, but in plain English, the court basically said the government can enforce the rule right now. Even though the full legal battle is still happening underneath, that's where many people are getting confused. They hear temporary ruling and think it doesn't matter, but temporary court orders can change daily life immediately. If police enforce the rule tomorrow, then for regular people, the rule is already real. Think of it like a road suddenly changing speed limits overnight. Even if lawyers are still fighting later, you can still get pulled over today. That's the part people miss when they hear legal commentators screaming online. The practical effect starts long before the final case ends. The ruling centered around federal firearm regulations tied to weapon classifications and ownership restrictions. Different versions of this fight have involved pistol braces, ghost guns, and firearm part kits. The exact legal target matters, but the bigger issue is federal power itself. How far can agencies go without Congress passing a brand new law? That question has become one of the biggest legal battles in America, because agencies now write rules that affect millions of people overnight. And when the rules involve firearms, mistakes can become criminal charges fast. Not years later? Right now, here's where this gets serious. A lot of gun owners think if something was legal yesterday, they're automatically safe today. That's not always true anymore. Federal agencies can reinterpret rules, and courts sometimes allow enforcement while lawsuits continue. That creates a dangerous gray area for ordinary people. Not hardened criminals, not gang members. Regular citizens who bought products legally, followed the rules they understood, and suddenly face new legal risks. That's why this ruling matters far beyond one specific firearm accessory. The court did not issue a final Second Amendment ruling here. That's important. The justices were not deciding the entire constitutional question once and for all. They were deciding whether the government could keep enforcing the rule during the ongoing court fight. And that difference matters more than people realize. Because online, some voices are acting like the Second Amendment either totally won or totally lost overnight. Neither is true. The real situation is much more complicated and honestly, much more dangerous for confused citizens. Here's the trap. People hear "not final" and stop paying attention. Then they walk straight into enforcement problems because they assumed nothing changed. But the enforcement side often moves first, long before the final Supreme Court answer arrives. That's why this ruling sent shockwaves through gun rights groups and legal analysts today. Not because every issue is settled, but because the court signaled how willing it may be to let federal regulations operate while constitutional fights continue. And that changes the pressure on everybody below. Lower courts are watching carefully now. Federal agencies are watching carefully now. State lawmakers are watching carefully now. And if you carry, transport, buy, or store firearms, you should be watching too. Drop a comment if you think emergency Supreme Court rulings should have this much power over daily life. And if you've noticed how confusing gun laws have become lately, hit like so more people actually see this discussion. Now let's talk about why the headline alone is misleading. A lot of news coverage framed this like an instant nationwide ban or total crackdown. Other outlets framed it like nothing really happened. Both versions leave out the most important part. The practical effect depends on where you live, what you own, and how local enforcement reacts. That's the reality nobody wants to simplify into a clean headline. Some police departments move aggressively after federal changes. Others wait for clearer guidance. But uncertainty itself creates risk. Because when laws become unclear, ordinary people make assumptions. And assumptions are exactly what get tested during real encounters with law enforcement, usually at the worst possible moment. Imagine this scenario. You bought a firearm accessory 2 years ago. At the time, stores sold it openly, videos discussed it openly, and nobody warned you about federal problems. Then overnight, enforcement rules change. Now you're driving home after work. You get stopped for speeding. The officer asks whether there are firearms in the vehicle. You answer honestly because you believe you're fully legal. But suddenly the conversation changes. Not because you intended harm, not because you ignored the law on purpose, but because the legal definition itself shifted underneath you. That's what scares so many people about these cases. The moving target, the feeling that lawful ownership today can become questionable tomorrow through agency interpretation alone. And whether you agree with that or not, it's becoming more common. Here's what this means for you. If you own firearms, you can't rely on old assumptions anymore. You need current information, not outdated advice from years ago, especially when federal and state rules collide. For concealed carriers, this matters during travel. One state may interpret enforcement differently than another, and crossing a state line can suddenly place you under a totally different legal environment, even if your behavior never changed. For first-time gun owners, this is even more confusing. You're trying to follow the rules responsibly, but the rules themselves keep shifting through lawsuits, agency memos, and emergency court orders. That creates fear and hesitation. And for parents who keep firearms at home, there's another layer. Storage choices that once seemed simple may now involve changing legal standards, especially if certain accessories or configurations become disputed under federal rules. That uncertainty puts pressure on families trying to stay lawful. Now let's talk about the police encounter issue, because this is where legal theory becomes real life fast. Many people believe explaining everything during a stop automatically helps them. Sometimes it can actually create more confusion. That does not mean lie to police. Never do that. But nervous oversharing during unclear legal situations can complicate encounters quickly, especially when officers themselves may still be learning new guidance. Think of it like tax law changing overnight. Not every IRS worker instantly understands every detail the next morning. The same thing can happen with firearm enforcement after sudden legal shifts. Confusion spreads downward very fast, and when confusion spreads, discretion matters more. One officer may view something as harmless. Another may believe it violates a federal rule. That difference alone can completely change your day. Here's another scenario people rarely think about. A man inherits firearms from a relative after a death in the family. He assumes everything is lawful because the items were owned for years without issue. Then new federal interpretations arrive. Now he's trying to transport those items to another state. Maybe for storage, maybe for transfer. And suddenly, he discovers the legal landscape changed while the family was grieving. That's not some movie plot. That's real life. This is why legal timing matters so much. Court rulings don't happen in neat classrooms. They hit ordinary people during stress, travel, family emergencies, and moments of confusion. That's where mistakes happen. And the part that should worry you is this. Most people only hear about these rulings after misinformation spreads online first. By then, rumors are everywhere. And people start acting confidently on bad information. Myth number 1 is already exploding online right now. Because the ruling was temporary, you can ignore it. No, that is dangerously wrong. Temporary enforcement still means enforcement. If agencies are allowed to apply the rule today, then today is what matters. Courts may change direction later, but later does not help someone facing charges or seizures now. That's reality. Myth number 2 says the Supreme Court completely abandoned the Second Amendment. Again, not true. The court did not issue a final ruling on the full constitutional question here. That battle is still moving through lower courts. But here's the nuance people miss. A temporary procedural ruling can still reveal how the justices think about future cases. Not perfectly? Not always. But legal observers absolutely pay attention to those signals. Myth number 3 is the opposite extreme. Some people claim this changes nothing at all. That's also false. If enforcement practices change overnight, then practical life changes overnight too. And practical life is what most Americans actually experience. Not abstract constitutional theory. Your interaction with the legal system happens during real moments with real consequences. That's why this matters. The bigger issue is this. We're entering an era where gun laws can shift through agency interpretation faster than Congress acts. That creates instability for lawful owners trying to stay compliant. And courts are becoming the battlefield for nearly every major dispute. This is where the next fight starts. Not just over one firearm rule, but over who gets to define firearm legality in the first place. Congress or federal agencies. That may sound boring at first, but it affects everything. Because if agencies can redefine categories broadly, millions of Americans may face sudden compliance questions. And most people won't even realize it until after changes take effect. That's the hidden consequence. Think of it like changing football rules during halftime. Players trained one way. Then suddenly officials reinterpret the rulebook in the middle of the game. Confusion becomes unavoidable. Now some viewers may ask, why didn't the court stop the rule immediately? That's a fair question. Emergency rulings often focus on procedure and timing, not just the final constitutional issue. The court sometimes wants lower courts to keep working first. But to ordinary Americans, that distinction feels meaningless, because enforcement does not pause while legal theory develops. If a rule applies today, families must react today. That's why emotions run so high around these decisions. And honestly, this pressure is growing everywhere. States are passing aggressive gun laws. Federal agencies are expanding interpretations. Courts are issuing mixed rulings that sometimes conflict across the country. So people end up trapped between headlines and reality. One headline screams victory. Another screams disaster. Meanwhile, regular citizens are left trying to understand what actually changed. This is why responsible gun ownership today requires more legal awareness than ever before. Not paranoia, not fear, just awareness. Because confusion itself has become one of the biggest risks. If you want updates before these legal fights hit the mainstream news cycle, subscribe now. The next wave of court battles is already building, and the consequences could reach far beyond this ruling. Now let's talk about another major misunderstanding. Many people think constitutional rights work like magical shields. They believe if something violates the Constitution, enforcement instantly stops everywhere. That's not how the system works. Constitutional fights can take years. During that time, rules may still apply depending on court orders. That's why emergency Supreme Court decisions matter so much. They shape the legal environment while the war continues. And this affects more than ownership, it affects purchasing too. Federal dealers may react cautiously after rulings like this. Background checks, delays, and compliance standards can tighten quickly. Imagine walking into a gun store this week. The clerk may be interpreting fresh guidance that changed only hours earlier. Manufacturers may still be reviewing legal advice themselves. Even businesses are scrambling during moments like this. That uncertainty spreads across the entire system. Retailers, buyers, attorneys, police departments, everybody starts asking the same question. What exactly is legal right now? And when nobody feels fully certain, caution increases. That means delays increase too. Some stores stop selling disputed items immediately, even before final court rulings arrive. Not because they hate customers, but because legal risk scares businesses. Now here's another practical scenario. A concealed carrier drives across 2 states for a family trip. He believes his setup complies with his home state laws. But another state interprets federal guidance differently after the ruling. At a routine stop, the legal assumptions collapse. The driver thought he was prepared. The officer thinks the configuration violates current federal interpretation. Now everything becomes stressful and uncertain very fast. This is why I thought it was legal often fails as protection. Intent matters morally. But legally, changing rules can still create exposure even without bad intent. That's the brutal reality many Americans are waking up to today. And before anyone twists this point, no, that does not mean people should panic. Panic creates mistakes too. The answer is staying informed, documenting purchases carefully, and paying attention to current legal guidance. Not acting recklessly based on internet rumors. Because social media is full of dangerous overconfidence right now. Some influencers are telling viewers to ignore federal changes entirely. Others are acting like mass confiscation starts tomorrow morning. Both extremes create confusion. The truth usually lives in the uncomfortable middle. Rights battles continue. Legal uncertainty continues. And ordinary people need calm, accurate information more than emotional screaming. Here's something else many viewers still don't see. Emergency rulings often shape future lawsuits indirectly. Lower judges study the Supreme Court's behavior carefully. Even temporary signals influence future legal strategies. So when the court allows enforcement to continue, agencies gain momentum. Not necessarily permanent victory, but momentum. And momentum affects how aggressively future rules may be written. Gun rights groups know this. That's why they react strongly even to temporary losses, because every procedural step can influence the battlefield ahead. Today's emergency order may shape tomorrow's major case. And yes, future major cases are coming. Absolutely coming. Challenges involving carry rights, firearm classifications, magazine restrictions, and agency authority are already moving through the courts. This ruling is not the end. It's part of a much larger chain reaction. That's why the language overnight change is not exaggeration. For many Americans, the practical legal environment really did shift overnight. Maybe not permanently, but immediately. And immediate changes are what matter during real-life encounters, during traffic stops, during home searches, during investigations after defensive firearm use. Now let's address another dangerous myth. Some people believe police automatically know every new court ruling instantly. That's unrealistic. Law enforcement agencies need time too. Different departments receive updates differently. Some provide detailed legal briefings quickly, others take longer, and during transition periods, misunderstandings can increase on all sides. That means your behavior matters more, not less. Staying calm matters more. Knowing current laws matters more. Avoiding emotional arguments on the roadside matters more. This is like dealing with a sudden airport security change. Arguing emotionally at the checkpoint rarely helps anyone. Clear documentation and calm behavior usually matter far more in tense systems. The same principle applies here. Now let's zoom out, because this ruling is also about federal authority itself. Can unelected agencies reshape major legal categories without Congress rewriting statutes directly? That fight goes far beyond firearms. The Supreme Court has already shown skepticism toward agency power in several recent cases, but this emergency ruling shows the court may still allow enforcement during ongoing litigation. That combination creates a strange legal landscape. Skepticism on one hand, temporary enforcement on the other, and that's why nobody should oversimplify this decision. It's not a clean ideological story. It's a procedural ruling with massive practical consequences. Those are often the hardest rulings for the public to understand. Meanwhile, lawmakers are watching closely. Some states may push even harder on firearm restrictions now. Others may move toward stronger protections. The divide across America could grow even wider. That means your legal situation may depend heavily on geography going forward. One state becomes more restrictive, another pushes back aggressively, and ordinary citizens are left navigating the chaos. This is where people get burned. They assume federal law automatically creates perfect nationwide clarity. It often doesn't. State enforcement, local policies, and ongoing lawsuits can create overlapping confusion. Now think about home defense cases for a second. Imagine someone uses a firearm legally during a break-in. Then investigators start examining every aspect of the weapon afterward. Every accessory, every configuration, every compliance issue. That's why these rulings carry emotional weight beyond politics. Because people fear legal second-guessing during the worst moments of their lives. Moments involving fear, adrenaline, and family safety. That emotional reality matters. And again, responsible ownership matters too. None of this is a free pass for reckless behavior. Courts consistently look at reasonableness, conduct, and compliance efforts. That remains true no matter where future rulings go. But Americans also want stability. They want clear lines, clear rules, clear expectations they can follow confidently. Right now, many people feel that stability slipping away. That's why these cases create such strong reactions. Not only because of rights debates, because uncertainty itself feels dangerous. The late-stage consequence here may be even bigger than today's headlines. Future Supreme Court cases could eventually define strict limits on agency gun regulations, or the court could allow broader federal flexibility than many expected. Either path would reshape the country. And lower courts are already dividing on some of these issues. That split increases pressure on the Supreme Court to step in again later. So if you think today settled everything, it didn't. The legal storm is still building. Remember the phrase we used earlier, protected in theory versus risky in practice? That gap is becoming one of the biggest stories in American gun law today, and people ignore it at their own risk. Because many Americans think only criminals face firearm legal problems. That's not always reality. Sometimes ordinary people get caught inside rapidly changing legal definitions and compliance disputes. That's why education matters. And here's the emotional core of all this. Most lawful gun owners are not looking for trouble. They want to protect their homes, families, and personal safety responsibly. They want to follow the law, but when the law changes rapidly, confidence disappears. People begin second-guessing routine decisions, travel decisions, storage decisions, purchase decisions, even basic conversations during police encounters. That stress spreads through entire communities. And once public trust weakens, confusion grows even faster. That's why clarity from courts matters so much, not just politically, but practically. So let's bring this together. The Supreme Court's 6-3 emergency ruling did not fully settle the constitutional fight, but it absolutely changed the enforcement landscape overnight. That part is real. Second, temporary rulings still carry real-world consequences. People who ignore them because lawsuits continue may put themselves at serious legal risk. The system moves in stages, but enforcement can happen immediately. That's the hard truth. Third, this fight is bigger than one firearm accessory or one federal rule. It's about who controls the boundaries of gun regulation going forward. Congress, federal agencies, courts. That battle is far from over. And going forward, awareness matters more than ever. Not panic, not rage, awareness. Because confusion is exactly where mistakes happen. The next few months could bring more lower court rulings, new injunctions, and even more emergency appeals. State governments may react differently too. Some may tighten rules. Others may challenge federal authority harder. The map could keep changing. That means staying informed is no longer optional for responsible owners, especially if you travel, carry, or purchase firearms regularly. Old assumptions are becoming less reliable every year. That's simply the reality now. At the end of the day, this isn't only about politics. It's about your freedom, your safety, and your ability to avoid preventable mistakes. It's about understanding the rules before stressful moments happen. Not after, because when real encounters happen, there's no pause button. No time to scroll headlines during a roadside stop. No time to research legal definitions during a home defense investigation. Preparation has to come first. If you want real legal updates without media spin or internet myths, subscribe and join this community. And comment below with the biggest question you still have about where gun laws and Supreme Court rulings are heading next.